All right, welcome to another deep dive. And today we're diving headfirst into the U.S. market on December 20th, 2024.
Definitely an interesting day.
Yeah, kind of a wild one, to be honest.
Ah.
We've got, well, I don't want to give it all away, but we've got a major pharmaceutical stock just taking a total nosedive, a beloved tech company having to issue a massive recall. And, amid all of this chaos, there are some actually bright spots in some really surprising places.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at a bunch of different financial news articles today, just kind of some summaries to help break it all down for you. So let's just jump right in.
Sounds good.
The market actually had a pretty good day, right?
Yeah, overall, all three of the major indices closed in the green: the S&P 500, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and the Nasdaq Composite.
It seems like there was a lot of concern going into the day about, a possible government shutdown and, those renewed tariff threats from former President Trump.
Yeah, it seems like the news about the inflation data kind of overshadowed all that.
So the inflation data was better than expected.
Yeah, a little bit. Like the core PCE index, it's showing some deceleration.
And that's, for those of us who aren't, hardcore econ nerds, what does that mean?
Basically, it measures inflation, but it takes out the volatile food and energy prices. And that's one of the indicators that the Federal Reserve watches really closely.
So does this mean that what the Fed has been doing to, curb inflation is actually working?
That's what a lot of people think.
Interesting. So it seems like that good economic news,
Yeah.
kind of outweighs all of that political uncertainty that's going on, at least for now.
Yeah, and that's just a good reminder that, while political stuff can cause short-term volatility in the market, the economics, the, underlying fundamentals, they're going to have a bigger impact on the market in the long run.
Right. Okay. So we have the positive overall trend, but of course there are always individual stocks that are, either up or down a lot. So let's talk about some of the most, noteworthy movements of the day, starting with the winners. Where should we start?
Well, how about Darden Restaurants?
Okay.
The ticker symbol is DRI.
Got it.
And their stock surged by 15%.
Wow.
So it seems like their Longhorn Steakhouse chain is doing really well and kind of driving a lot of the strong earnings that they're getting.
Well, people got to have their steak, right? Even when there's inflation.
Apparently so, yeah. And Darden actually raised their full-year revenue outlook, which is a really good sign.
Awesome. What about Accenture? I feel like I've been hearing a lot about them in the news lately.
Ticker symbol ACN.
Yep.
Their stock jumped by 7.1%. They also beat earnings expectations and raised their revenue forecast as well.
What is it that they do that's doing so well?
They do a lot of consulting work, especially in AI.
Ah, okay. So they're kind of riding that AI wave that everybody's talking about these days.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's Palantir Technologies, PLTR.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of them.
They gained a solid 4% after they got this big U.S. Army contract. It's worth almost $619 million.
Almost $619 million.
Wow. And you know what? Their stock has actually quadrupled in value this year. And they're even joining the Nasdaq 100 index next week.
That's huge.
It is. So yeah, it looks like we've got some restaurants that are being resilient, some AI stuff that's booming, and of course some really lucrative defense contracts out there. Kind of an interesting mix.
Yeah, definitely. So those were some of the big winners of the day, but we can't have winners without losers.
Yeah.
Were there any sectors in particular that struggled on the 20th?
It seems like technology kind of had a mixed bag.
Okay.
So some of them did great, like Accenture and Palantir.
Yeah.
But some of them didn't. Like Micron Technology MU, their shares fell by 16%.
Oof, that's rough.
It is. And they're saying it's because of weak demand,
Uh-huh.
For PCs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is that a sign that maybe those sectors are going to struggle?
Could be. And then there's Weston. They make, frozen potato products. Their ticker is LW.
Okay.
And they didn't do so well either. Their stock plunged by 20% after an unexpected quarterly loss.
So even potatoes aren't safe from the economy.
Right. So I think that kind of shows that, there are some parts of the economy that are doing okay, but there are others that are struggling. It's just this mixed bag.
A real mixed bag. And speaking of mixed bags, I heard there was one stock in particular that had just a really dramatic fall. What happened there?
You're talking about Novo Nordisk?
Yeah.
NVO?
Yep.
So their stock fell by over 20%.
Wow, that's massive.
Yeah, it wiped out $125 billion of their market value.
$125 billion.
Yeah.
Jeez. What happened there?
Well, they had some disappointing results from a trial. It was a late-stage trial for their next-gen obesity medication, Pugresima.
Oh, okay. So this was like a drug that everybody was really excited about.
Pretty much, yeah. Novo Nordisk has been like the leader in the obesity treatment market, and this was supposed to be their next big thing. So this setback, it really made investors nervous.
Yeah, makes sense. So
Yeah.
even the big guys can fall, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And speaking of falling, Tesla also had kind of a rough day.
Yeah. Their stock TSLA fell by 6% after they announced a recall. It was a pretty big recall.
So big.
It was for almost 700,000 vehicles in the U.S.
700,000. Wow. What was wrong with
There's a
that?
defect in the tire pressure monitoring system.
You know, I feel like I've been seeing a lot about Tesla recalls in the news this year. Is this like becoming a pattern for them?
It's definitely something to watch.
Yeah.
Because all these recalls, the production challenges they've been having, and all this new competition in the EV market, it could start to hurt their brand image and how many cars they sell in the future.
Yeah, interesting. So let's change gears a bit here. What about semiconductors? I think I read that global chip stocks also had some pressure on the 20th.
Yeah, that's right. It seems like former President Trump is making some new tariff threats on European goods.
Oh boy, here we go again.
Yeah, and that really sent ripples through the whole semiconductor industry.
So did any specific companies get hit hard?
ASML and TSMC both dipped a little.
Okay.
And even NVIDIA, they make those AI chips, they felt the pressure too.
And I'm guessing this is all on top of those supply chain issues they've been having.
Yep.
So why is this a big deal? For those of us who aren't following the semiconductor industry super closely.
Well, semiconductors are in like everything.
Right.
Smartphones, laptops, cars, you name it. So any problems in this sector can have, ripple effects throughout the whole global economy.
So we've talked about the market rebound that happened, some stocks that did really well and some that didn't, and some of the issues of semiconductors. Before we move on, what about precious metals? What's going on with gold and silver?
Well, gold actually went up a little bit today. It closed at $2,604.10 an ounce. But it's still down for the week.
So is gold not the safe haven asset that everybody says it is?
It's still considered a good hedge against inflation, but its price is affected by a lot of stuff. Interest rates, how currencies are doing, global demand, all of that.
Okay. And what about silver?
It had a small gain today, too, closing at $32.57 an ounce, but it's heading for its worst week since July.
Oh, wow. So precious metals aren't exactly, shining right now. But before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I have to ask, with all this volatility in the market, are there still opportunities out there for, everyday investors?
That is the million-dollar question. Yeah, and I'd say the answer is yes.
Okay, good. I was getting a little worried there for a second. So where should we be looking for these opportunities?
It's so easy to focus on, like, the day-to-day ups and downs. But, what's really interesting is when you look for those opportunities that maybe people aren't talking about as much, the ones that are, like, poised for growth even when everything else is kind of crazy.
Okay, I like that. So you're saying there's still hope for, us regular investors.
Exactly.
Where do we need to be looking?
Well, semiconductors are a good place to start.
Okay. But weren't they like one of the losers of the day?
Well, yeah. Micron technology, the one that had that 16% drop?
Right.
They actually have a strong buy rating. Yeah, 23 out of 24 top analysts still say it's a buy. And they're predicting a potential upside of 76%.
76%. Are you serious?
Yeah.
But they just said that demand is weak.
Right. But they're like a really big player in the memory chip market. And memory chips, they're used in everything from data centers to, all the AI stuff that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
And that demand for all that stuff is just going to keep growing and growing. So Micron is in a good spot to benefit from that.
So it's kind of like, yeah, they're having a little bit of a rough time right now, but long term, they're going to be in a good position.
That's the idea, yeah. It's like sometimes when there's like a short-term problem, it actually creates an opportunity for people who are thinking long-term.
Right. Okay. So Micron is one to keep an eye on. What else?
Let's look at Churchill Downs.
Churchill Downs. Like the racetrack?
Yep, ticker symbol CHDN.
Got it.
And they're actually doing pretty well.
Really? I wouldn't have thought that, gaming and entertainment would be doing so hot right now.
Well, they own the Churchill Downs racetrack, where they have the Kentucky Derby. But they're not just about horse racing anymore. They've been branching out into online wagering and casinos.
Oh, okay. So they're tapping into that whole online entertainment, online gambling trend that's happening.
Exactly. And the analysts are pretty bullish on them. All 7 of the top analysts who cover the stock give it a buy rating. And they're projecting an upside of over 25%.
Okay, so that's 2 interesting opportunities. What's the last one?
Let's talk about comfort, specifically Lovesac.
Lovesac. I've heard of them. Don't they make those beanbag chairs?
Kind of. They make like modular furniture so you can customize it.
Hmm. Okay. That doesn't really sound like something that would have a lot of growth potential.
Well, it's actually really popular with younger people.
Oh, really? Why is that?
I think it's because they like how flexible it is. You can change it up as your needs change, as your space changes.
So it's like Legos for adults.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But it's not just about being fun. Their stuff is really high quality and it lasts a long time. And they've been doing a good job of selling online and building a loyal customer base.
So they're combining comfort with convenience and customization.
Yeah.
I can see why that would appeal to people, especially as, people are thinking more about experiences and less about just buying a bunch of stuff.
Right. And the analysts agree. All 4 of the top analysts who cover the stock give it a buy rating. And they're predicting an upside of over 63%.
Okay, wow. So we've got Micron, which is betting on the future of memory chips.
Yeah.
We've got Churchill Downs, which is kind of riding the online entertainment wave.
Right.
And then Lovesac, which is, I guess, capitalizing on that whole modular living thing.
Exactly.
3 very different companies.
But they all have a lot of potential.
It's kind of amazing that even with all the uncertainty in the market, there are still these opportunities out there.
Yeah, as long as you know where to look.
Right. Of course, we have to say, this is just our deep dive, our take on things.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who's thinking about investing should do their own research and talk to a financial advisor.
Definitely. Investing always has risks, and you always want to have a diversified portfolio and, be thinking long term.
Right. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, even if that basket is filled with comfy, modular furniture. All right, so let's get back to that market overview and see if there's anything else we missed.
Okay, sounds good. So one thing that I thought was interesting was how they all talked about the S&P 500. Like, they all said it had a good day, right? But the numbers were a little different. One of them had it closing at $5,965.80, which was down like 1.68% from the day before. And then another one had it at $594.09, up 1.36%. And then the third one just said that it gained 0.7%.
Wait a minute. So the S&P 500 was both up and down on the same day? That's confusing.
Yeah, it just goes to show you that you have to be careful about the context when you're looking at this stuff. Like, one source might be talking about the high point of the day before it went down a bit, and another one might be talking about the closing price. It just depends.
So basically, the devil's in the details.
Right. But even with those little differences, they all agreed that the cooler inflation data is what was driving the market, in a positive direction. They all talked about how important that core PCE index is.
It seems like that was like the main thing that everyone was talking about. But I did notice that only one of the sources mentioned Bitcoin. Why do you think that is?
I'm not really sure. Maybe because it's still kind of like a niche thing, compared to stocks and all that.
Yeah, maybe. It's kind of like it's still trying to find its place in the world. So what else stood out to you?
Well, they all kind of had different takes on the risks and opportunities in the market, which I thought was interesting. So, like, one of them was really worried about companies not meeting their earnings expectations, like what happened with Micron and Weston.
Yeah.
And they were saying that that might be a sign that things are going to slow down.
Makes sense.
But then another one of the sources was more focused on the opportunities. They were talking about those stocks that we discussed, Micron, Churchill Downs, and Lovesac.
Right.
And they were saying that Wall Street analysts are really high on them.
So which is it? Is Micron a good investment or a bad one?
No, I think it depends on how long you're planning on holding on to it. Short term, they're having some problems, but the analysts who are recommending it are thinking about the long term. They're thinking about how important memory chips are going to be in the future.
So it's all about perspective.
Exactly. What might look like a risk to one person could be an opportunity to someone else. And that's why it's so important to really do your homework before you invest in anything. Don't just follow the headlines. You have to understand the fundamentals of the company.
Awesome advice. Well, I think we've covered just about everything. We talked about how the market went up, some of the winners and losers, those semiconductor problems, and some potential risks and opportunities. Is there anything else that our listeners should keep in mind as they, think about all this stuff?
The market is always changing. There's always going to be uncertainty and things that you can't predict. But if you stay informed and do your research and think about the long term, you'll be in good shape.
That's great advice. Well, that's it for our deep dive into the market on December 20th, 2024. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.
Until next time, happy investing.
And don't forget to check out the show notes for links and all that good stuff.
We'll see you back here soon.